Welcome back. I'm so excited that we have the opportunity to travel to Israel together. Before we know it, in a few short months, we're going to be walking where we're talking about. So to continue to get ready for this trip, I want to go to the Gospel of John. So if you have a Bible, go ahead and grab it. Let's open up to John chapter 1. As I'm turning there, we're going to be looking at a scene that happens in the adult life of Jesus very early in his ministry. We're going to be in John chapter 1, verses 43 through 51. It says this: The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. Galilee is this northern region right here, this area in orange. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Bethsaida here is on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "Of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." So this is a significant statement here. What happens is Philip tells Nathanael that they found the Messiah, the one who Moses about in Genesis 3:15, in Genesis 22, in Numbers 24, and he says what the prophets spoke about, right? About Micah 5 being born in Bethlehem, in Isaiah talking about the suffering servant, Jeremiah speaking of the branch, Daniel talking about the Son of Man. All of this, they said, we have found him, and it's Jesus of Nazareth. Now, let's take a look at the response of Nathanael. Verse 46. Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Well, that's an interesting question, right? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Clearly, what we know to be true is that Nathanael's skeptical simply because of where Jesus came from. Now, all of us have some type of working definition of the wrong side of town, the wrong side of the tracks, the bad part of town, and we have some reasons for considering that. So the question is why is Nathanael so skeptical of Jesus? Because he's from Nazareth. Why is Nathanael skeptical? Well, this is Philip's response. Come and see. Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" Jesus answered him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Nathanael answered him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." And so Jesus gives Nathanael a glimpse of his God nature, his all-knowing power, and it causes Nathanael to reconsider his bias towards Nazareth. But let's go back to that question. Why for Nathanael is it questionable that Jesus is the Messiah from the writings of Moses and the prophets, from the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, the Old Testament? Well, we have to understand that in Jesus' day, Nazareth was a town that was off the beaten path. The major trade routes ran far enough around Nazareth that there was never really a reason to go to Nazareth as you traveled. Other cities became prominent because they were along major trade routes, but for Nazareth, not the case. Also, Nazareth is basically built inside of a bowl of a hill. If you imagine mountains kind of coming around it, and then it's built down in that valley. And so it's kind of, even if it was on a trade route, it would be so hard to get to it because of the fact that you'd have to go uphill and downhill again. Mark Twain famously wrote about Nazareth when he traveled there in the 19th century. Let me share with you what Mark Twain wrote. He said, "We dismounted and drove the horses down a bridle path," meaning that the path was so treacherous that they weren't even able to ride the horses down it. So we drove the horses down a bridle path, which I think was fully as crooked as a corkscrew, right? So just back and forth, switchbacks, which I know to be as steep as a downward sweep of a rainbow, right? That it's so steep that it's like the end of a rainbow, just straight down. And which I believe to be the worst piece of road in the geography, except one in the Sandwich Islands, which I remember painfully, and possibly one or two mountain trails in the Sierra Nevadas. So in all of the places that Mark Twain had traveled, this road in Nazareth was in the top 5 worst roads. And it wasn't any better in the first century. It wasn't any better in the first century. And so that gives you a picture of what the geography of Nazareth was like. And so it was a one-horse town. It was a place that nobody traveled to. It was a place of insignificance. It's so insignificant that it's not even mentioned in the Old Testament. There's no historical event attached to it in the history of Israel. And yet, the Messiah grows up there. And so it's understandable why Nathanael thought, oh, why would anything good come from Nazareth? My first time traveling to Nazareth, it was my first day in Israel ever. And so we went there. We were staying pretty close by. And it was impossible to find a place to park. We thought we had found a place to park. We went to the church that's built in honor of Mary there. It's a Catholic church. We got chased out of there before we even got in there because we were immodestly dressed wearing shorts. And then when we came back to the car, a bird had defecated on it, and there was a parking ticket on the windshield. And it was at that moment that I said out loud to the group, I said, can anything good come from Nazareth? Well, fortunately for us, we'll have a very different experience when we travel to Nazareth. There lies a first century recreation village. It's unlike anything else that you'll see, and we'll see it very early on the trip. So when we're in Nazareth, we're going to go to this first century recreation village, and we're going to see what the houses look like, how the houses were built, and we're going to walk inside of them. And so that way you get a feel for when Jesus was walking around Nazareth growing up as a young boy, as into an early man. What was it like? You're going to see what a first century carpenter workshop looked like, what type of workshop his father Joseph would have worked in. You're going to see what it's like to spin yarn and to weave in a first century technology. You're going to see what it's like with first century animals like donkeys walking around right past you, be able to pet the donkey. And you're going to be able to go into a first century synagogue, what it was like for when Jesus sat down in the synagogue every Saturday morning. All of those things you're going to experience when you go to Nazareth. But let's ask another question. Why was Jesus, the Messiah, the King of Israel, the one to grow up in a town so far removed from the main flow of Israel? Why wouldn't Jesus grow up in some place more predominant like Jerusalem or even Bethlehem or even someplace like Capernaum where Peter was? Why is it that Jesus grows up in Nazareth, this place that's off the beaten path? Well, if we go to Matthew 2 now, Matthew 2, there's a series of prophecy fulfillments that takes place in Matthew 2. Now, I'm going to share the last one with you in verse 23. And he, this is referring to Jesus, went and lived in a city called Nazareth. That which was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, he shall be called a Nazarene. Now what's interesting here is that if you look closely at the other prophecy fulfillments in chapter 2, you'll see that there's a little indicator showing what passage in the Old Testament was being fulfilled by this event. But here, there's no indicator. Why? Because there's no phrase in the Old that says he shall be called a Nazarene. There's no passage in the Old Testament that connects a Nazarene with Messiah. And so the question is, well, what exactly is Matthew doing here? Well, he's doing something that's actually a summary fulfillment, meaning that although there's no specific verse that this fulfills, it fulfills a summary of an idea. And what we see consistently, especially in Isaiah, is that the Messiah is going to suffer. The Messiah is going to be disdained. Messiah is going to be looked down on. And so therefore, Matthew can say, he shall be called a Nazarene, meaning that we see how Nathanael looks at someone from Nazareth as being someone who's looked down upon. This summarizes of the fact that the Messiah would be dejected, that he wouldn't be held in high prominent, high regard, but someone would look at his humble beginnings and go, can anything good come from somebody from there? And so this whole idea throughout the Old Testament, the Messiah being someone who's going to be dejected, the idea of a suffering servant, is ultimately fulfilled in this one sentence. He shall be called a Nazarene. Now, something else that we can suggest, and this is a bit more speculation, is that because Messiah Jesus didn't want to reveal who he was until it was the proper time, until he wanted to enter into his public ministry, then it was significant that he was off the beaten path. He was the place where everybody would know who he was. It was easier in a place like Nazareth for Jesus to live a life that was unnoticed until it was time to be noticed. And what I love about this, our takeaway for today, is that God consistently has a way of doing significant things through seemingly insignificant things or places or people. And so I want to ask you this question as you think about this today. To everyone else, Nazareth, totally insignificant place. However, God uses it in a significant way in the life of our Messiah, Jesus, in his upbringing, in his reputation, and ultimately fulfilling his word. And so, for you, is there something that you look at as seemingly insignificant? Perhaps it's a skill, a hobby, a gift, a job, a role in church, perhaps even yourself. Or maybe it's another person that you're in relationship with. Who do you look at and think, that's insignificant? So once you have that in your head, I want you to ask this question. If you were to go before God and say, Lord, is there a way in which you want to use a seemingly insignificant thing, or this insignificant gift, or perhaps this insignificant person in a significant way? Would you be willing to pray that prayer? And my hope is that through this devotion and the way that the Lord works in your life, that as you continue to prepare for this once-in-a-lifetime trip to Israel, that God would work in a significant way, growing you more into the image of his Son, Jesus Christ. Thanks so much for joining me.